This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 132. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 132 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. In this podcast, we are going to be discussing the 5 keys to interviewing a BAS candidate. So you're going to notice a new format to the podcast if you've been listening for a while. If you are listening for your first time, welcome. My name is Phil Zito. I'm the founder and CEO of Building Automation Monthly, where we provide online training to BAS professionals to help them increase their ability to execute building automation work as profitably and productively as possible. So the new format that we're going to be running on the podcast is a 4-week revolving cycle. And what that means is week 1, we will be covering management topics. Week 2, we will be covering sales topics. Week 3, we will be covering technical topics. And week 4, we will be covering IT topics. And we'll just be rotating through these. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is that we have gotten a lot of really valuable questions coming our way lately that has influenced what we're going to be covering on the podcast going forward. If you would like to provide your feedback, then go to support@buildingautomationmonthly.com and send us an email and let us know what you would like to hear on the podcast, and we'll try to work it in there. So with all of that being said, let's dive into the 5 keys to interviewing a building automation system candidate. So I got this email this morning. I woke up, at least the morning when I'm recording this episode, I got this email sitting in our email box from a prospective customer that we're just finalizing the proposal and they're going to sign up several of their students for our courses. And he said, "Hey, Phil, I know this is short notice, but I'm bringing a guy in to get interviewed this morning, and I'm wondering if you had any form of test or question bank that you could use to assess him." And my initial response was, that's interesting. And I thought back to all the different times I'd been interviewed in the past. I thought about the good interviews. I thought about the bad interviews. I mean, I had some pretty awesome interviews. Roy Cardwell at Schneider Electric does really awesome interviews. He's a good guy too, down there in Texas. I've had some pretty terrible interviews. I'm not going to call anyone out on that. And most of my interviews, honestly, were in between. So in this episode, we're going to talk through the 5 keys to how you can go about assessing your potential hires. And at the end of the episode, I'll tell you what I ended up doing for this guy who needed a test. And I'll tell you about a way you could potentially work with us to do the exact same thing. So key 1 to doing effective interviews, and this is going to seem super duper obvious, but let's be honest, it's not really being done. Key 1 is understand what you are hiring them to do. Now, I know, I'm hiring them to do BAS controls, Phil. What do you mean? Of course I know, but what are you really hiring them to do? The reason we've been so effective at growing our business, and the reason our training has been so effective, is our courses focus in on, every time we create a course, we say, what key task does the person need to do that is going to be most impactful to the profitability of the business? Now, I know you guys are probably sick and tired of me talking about profitability and productivity. That may not resonate if you're just a technician, because I know back when I was a tech, it didn't really resonate to me until I had profit and loss responsibility. And it resonates for a couple of reasons, and it's important to you for a couple of reasons. One is without profitability, you can't pay the bills. Without paying the bills, you can't have paychecks. So from a technician perspective, it's very important. So if you are a tech and you're interviewing someone, you want to think about how profitably can they execute the work, but also how productively Can they execute the work? Man, I'm mixing up words here. And the reason why is you do not want to be out there on a Friday night because someone messed something up. You got to think about yourself too. So how do you do that? Well, you understand what you're hiring them to do. And what I mean by that is you go and you think about, I'm hiring an installer. It would be great if they can go and program all the field controllers, but that's not the number one task you're hiring them to do. Typically, when you're hiring an installer, you're hiring them to do point-to-point checkout, to upload and download controllers, and to map points into a supervisory device, maybe even create graphics and point extensions. Those are the key tasks that you're hiring them to do. If they can do stuff beyond that, that's a bonus. But I find a lot of folks, when they're struggling to get talent in the door, it's because their job descriptions or simply their goal, they're looking for someone who's like themselves, or they're looking for someone who's a super tech, or they're completely focused on the wrong key tasks. So key number one is to understand what you are hiring someone to do. So once you get that down, then we can move on to key number two. So what I want you to do, let's make this an interactive exercise for those of you who are looking to hire or interview people. I want you to go and write down, think of someone you're looking to hire or interview, and write down, what are you hiring them to do? It should be 1 to 3 things. If it's more than 3 things, you've got too many. Now, key number 2 is to list out those key tasks and the supporting skills. What do I mean by this? Well, if you think about a key task, let's say we want them to be able to do point-to-point checkout on a field controller. There's some supporting skills in order for them to do that. They need to have basic electrical knowledge. They need to understand what wiring is. They need to understand what sensors are. They need to be able to think through the process. And those supporting skills are going to become very important in the interviewing process. So let's look at 3 categories of common BAS jobs and positions and what supporting skills would exist for those 3 categories. So the first one is install, right? So basic install. And you would want folks to have an understanding of electrical systems, right? What is a circuit? What is a relay? What are contacts? What is AC versus DC voltage? What's dry versus wet? What's milliamp? What's voltage? What's resistance? What's ohms, etc. Then you want them to have basic MEP knowledge. You'd want them to be able to read the drawings, to understand mechanical systems. We're not looking for an HVAC mechanic here, but we are looking for someone who can look at the drawings, understand what they mean, and be able to insert that. And a common skill that we're going to be looking at across the board. So I was talking with this guy the other day, and we were talking about, why does it seem like mechanics tend to struggle when they're moving into BAS? Because I argue that it's a belief system. It's a mental belief. Because if you can go and you're an electrician or you're a mechanic, you have the aptitude to do building automation. I would argue that in some cases, being a mechanic or electrician can be a little harder because you have to memorize all these different things. And controls, it's pretty simple. It's inputs and outputs and then logic. And I think it's that soft skill of logic that tends to trip a lot of folks up, because a lot of what we deal with is abstract. It's in our head. It's not, you can't look at a set of plans and figure out how you're going to write a program for controls. So logic and being able to logically think through how all these things connect is a very important skill. Then we move on to skill set or skill group number 2, which is design. And here in design, we're looking more for supporting skills around knowledge. So do you have knowledge of the different parts and pieces? Do you know the different architecture strategies? Do you understand the protocols? Why would you want to address your MAC addresses in sequence on a network riser versus just whatever and willy-nilly? Why do you go and utilize normally open contacts instead of normally closed contacts, or normally closed contacts instead of normally open contacts? So these kind of things. And then problem solving, being able to look at a specification, look at a set of MEP plans, and turn that into a design. And design tends to break up across the many companies we've worked with. It tends to break up across two kind of sectors: hardware design and software design. So you've got hardware design, which is the control submittals, creating the hardware design, deciding what inputs go where on what controllers, all of those things. And then you've got software design, which is doing programming, graphics, etc. And then you've got the third bucket, which is programming. And there's a difference between a designer who writes programs and a dedicated programmer who is capable of doing system integration, working with APIs, those kind of things. Two completely different skill sets. On one hand, you've got folks who can write programs using graphical logic or using line code, depending on the product line. And on the other hand, you have a true programmer who can actually go out, can work with APIs, understands primitives, understands IDEs, integrated development environments, understands how to work with different programming languages like C# or Java or JavaScript, HTML, AngularJS, those kind of things. And here in programming, it becomes very important that you test their ability to have a process. What is their process for programming? That's a very important supporting skill. And the last thing you want is someone who writes a program that no one has any idea what it does and it can't be supported. And then they're thinking, how do they approach a problem? How do they structure a problem? How do they go and execute that code? So once you've listed out these supporting skills, here's what you're going to do. You're going to move on to key number 3. And you're going to test these key tasks in exercises. Notice I did not say necessarily question and answer, which is the way we test right now. We do a combination of question and answer and exercises. I believe that exercises are the preferred method, but they are much more labor intensive. So for what we do for our programs, since we are doing pre-tests and post-tests, we use question and answer combined with some exercises. For an interview, you're less looking for knowledge and more looking for skill and experience. And so that is when you would focus more in on the exercises. But you're going to come up with some key tasks in these exercises that you want them to do. And then you're going to look for the supporting skills. So for example, install. You could bring someone in and have them go and interview for an install role. And I've had this done before where there's a field controller and a box of parts. I'm given a control submittal and I'm asked to go up onto a wall that has a piece of DIN rail mounted on it, take that controller, wire it up, and get it wired per the control submittal. Now, granted, this assumes a little bit of skill. This assumes a little bit of foreknowledge. It's something we're teaching in our upcoming BAS Startup and Checkout course, how to take the control submittals and go and install, startup, and checkout and configure controls. But, I mean, think about it. How many times have you gone to an interview and folks actually tested those install skills? That's something that, one, it's going to test their ability to do it, but two, you're going to look at supporting skills. Why did you wire it up this way? Why did you make that choice? Why did you make this choice? Have them explain it to you, not in an accusatory way. I mean, you don't want to just sit there and be a drill sergeant. But on the same token, you do want to explore their thought process. Then you have design, and you could do the exact same thing. You could take a set of MEP plans, a specification, and you can have them create a control submittal. Now, granted, in the limited time you typically have for an interview, you aren't going to get a complete control submittal, but at least they could do the network riser or the control diagram or the electrical details. You can have them go and do that. And then finally, for programming, you can have them actually write a program. And you can have them explain how they're writing the program. Why are they writing the program that way? What blocks would they use? What other blocks could they use? You could give them an example program and have them interpret it and ask them how they would modify it. You could give them a broken program and have them find the break in the program. These are all exercises that are quite easy to do if you're an established controls company, because you'll already have all the materials you need. You just simply need to go and put together the exercises. Key number 4. This is something we did back when I ran an ops group, and I haven't really heard of anyone else doing this. Maybe folks do this, but I personally, as I look back, something I'm very proud of is the fact that I would say 95% of the people that I hired into our ops group back when I was an ops manager are still there or have been promoted. And, that's a really cool thing in this day and age when you look at how quickly the churn rate is in our industry, how quickly people get chewed out and spit out if they don't know what they're doing. Well, one of the reasons why I feel that our team was so effective was because we assigned homework to interviewees. So when we would interview folks, we would go and we give them a little assignment like, hey, go and figure out, let me think of an example here. Okay, so go and here's this train unit. I want to know what backnet card that train unit can have and what points I would have for this sequence. And then they would email the response. Some folks, you would get that email later that afternoon. Other folks, they would never reach out to you ever again. It's a really low cost for you and honestly for your applicant because they're going to grow in their knowledge. I mean, it's a win-win. You're getting to see if they can go do research and if they're motivated to do research. And then on the flip side, they're getting to grow in their ability to do research, because if there's one thing that is key to our field and success in our field, it is the ability to research, because there are so many unknowns. I remember when I started in this field, there were only a couple control lines. Now it seems like everybody has their own controls line. I mean, you've got all sorts of different controls lines out in the market. And because of that, you have to be able to look at something and then quickly figure out what it is, what it does, what does it mean to you, and how do you work with it. And being able to research that and deal with incomplete information is important. But having the self-motivation and the drive to do that is even more important. When you ask someone to go do some research and 4 hours later you get an email back explaining it, and here's another key, look for humility. Look for, I don't know for a fact that this is accurate, but here's what I was able to find. Because someone who is willing to admit they don't know something is going to grow much faster than someone who assumes they know everything. I hope that through this podcast, I've demonstrated that humility. I hope that I've said to you at times when I don't know something, when I'm unfamiliar with something. And through that, I've shown you that it's okay to admit you don't know something, because that's really important. And it's just as equally important to have the self-motivation to do research and to be able to look at information and pull that information out. And the last key I'm going to leave you with here is key number 5, and it's being consistent. Initially, this is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be unfamiliar. You've probably been raised in the school of, we ask some behavioral questions, we have a bunch of different people who interview, they're fitting this in between all the other tasks they have to do. It's awkward for the interviewer because they've never been trained on how to effectively interview people. Now, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on behavioral interviewing or to be someone who could say, this is how you find skill traits and behavior traits and cultural fit and alignment. I claim no expertise in that. That is not a strength of mine. However, I'm really good at picking out if people have technical skill and acumen and the ability to develop technical skill and acumen. And I will tell you, by doing these 5 keys, by getting really clear on your key tasks, then going and understanding the supporting skills, and then measuring those key tasks and supporting skills through clear exercises, testing the ability of the candidate to go and do research and to be driven enough to provide an example of, hey, I'm going to go and research something that is unfamiliar to me, and I'm going to get back to you. And then being consistent about the entire process, not having a different exercise for every single person, that is going to start to form trends. You're going to start to see that candidates that do well in these specific exercises and candidates that respond within this amount of time and provide this kind of response in their research tend to fit your organization and tend to be your good candidates. Now, I wish I could tell you this is something you can implement, and in a month you will just see massive results. But the reality is this is a 12-month process. This is something you implement the exercises, you implement the research and homework assignments, and then you go and you test the results and you see which students or which employees, see, I think it's students because that's what we do, we teach, but which employees are having the greatest impact in your business. And then you identify those responses, those norms, and that becomes your profile that you look for. But you can only do that if you're consistent in how you test these skills. Okay, so I mentioned that at the end of this episode, I would discuss how you can use this same process. So here's the deal. If you send us an email at support@buildingautomationmonthly.com and you say, hey, Phil, I'm interested in this. This is something we're considering putting a product together about, a product that would help folks to go and effectively interview and assess the technical side of their interviewees. So feel free to reach out to us. If we get enough responses, then this may be something that we put together. Even if we don't, I'll still point you in the right direction. So I encourage you to reach out. And everything we've discussed today, including our corporate programs, including our courses, including notes and timestamps related to this episode, can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/132. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/132. And in next week's episode, we are going to be discussing the 5 steps for effective BAS takeoffs. You know, I've had a lot of sales folks reach out to me recently and a lot of engineers who are, how do I do effective takeoffs? How do I really scope my projects? And this is a topic that we've had a lot of experience with. It's something we're really good at. And in the next episode, we're going to be discussing that. Once again, I really encourage you to reach out to us at support@buildingautomationmonthly.com with any questions or ideas you have for the episodes. And I will leave you with this one last thing. I encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/132. And I encourage you to tell us what the most effective interviews you've had are. Why were they effective? What strategies were used? Share your information, help the building automation industry grow in our knowledge and our effectiveness at growing talent in the industry. And with that, I really thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you like the new format. If you don't, reach out to us, let us know. If you do, reach out to us, let us know. And until next week, continue to grow in your knowledge of building automation. Continue to push beyond your limitations. And I look forward to being able to share our experience with you every week on the Building Automation Monthly podcast. This is Phil Zito, founder and CEO of buildingautomationmonthly.com. and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Thanks a ton. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.